Indonesia is sitting on top of one of the largest untapped energy resources on the planet. It's not oil, it's not gas, heat. Literally heat trapped underground all across the country throughout the Ring of Fire, as we call it. Experts estimate Indonesia has around 24 gigawatts of geothermal potential. That's enough to power tens of millions of homes. And right now, the country is using maybe 1/10 of it. So here's the question worth asking. If the resource is that big, why is it moving so slowly? Part of that answer runs through an institution most people have never heard of. It's called EBTKE. Now, geothermal is only one piece of what this institution handles. The same directorate also oversees solar, wind, hydro, bioenergy, and energy efficiency across the entire country. We're using geothermal as our way in because it's one of the clearest examples of both what this institution can actually do and where its limits of its powers sit. I'm Tommy Jamel, 30 years in Indonesia's energy sector, and I still pay attention every single day because things change here. Regulations, policies, priorities, and if you stop paying attention, you'll miss it. This is an extension of my series titled Indonesia Energy Explained. Let's go. EBTKE stands for Energi Baru Terbarukan dan Konservasi Energi. In English, that's New, Renewable Energy, and Energy Conservation. The official English name is used by the ministry itself as the Directorate General of New, Reliable Energy and Energy Conservation. It's a long one. It's a Directorate General, which is basically a specialized department sitting inside Indonesia's Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, known as ESDM. I've also done another video on what ESDM is and what their powers are, so make sure you go back and look for that one. If you've heard of SKK Migas, which I also did a video on, think of it this way. SKK Migas handles the upstream oil and gas. And if you recall my video about BPH Migas, they handle the downstream, the fuel distribution, everything that goes to the consumers. EBTKE handles something completely different. Geothermal, solar, wind, hydro, bioenergy, and energy efficiency. In plain terms, EBTKE is the government body that writes the rules, hands out the permits, and sets the targets for everything in Indonesia that isn't oil or coal. Geothermal gets a lot of the headlines because Indonesia's volcanoes make it one of the most naturally gifted countries on earth for this kind of power. But solar, bioenergy, and energy efficiency programs are just as much a part of EBTKE's actual workload, and they're becoming just as important to how Indonesia's energy mix evolves. Geothermal is the sharpest example to explain the institution with, not the whole of it. Why geothermal? Why now? Here's the interesting part. Indonesia's National Energy Plan, the RUPTL, it's covering from 2025 to 2034, calls for a major build-out of renewable capacity. It is part of a longer-term goal, 75 gigawatts of renewable power running by 2040. Geothermal is supposed to be a meaningful piece of that. It's stable, it runs day and night, unlike solar and wind, which also depend on the weather. For a country trying to keep the lights on and affordability while cutting emissions, that reliability really matters. So, EBTKE isn't just managing a side project. It's managing what could be one of the most important pieces of Indonesia's entire energy transition. So, what does EBTKE actually do in practice, you ask? It sets the technical standards for geothermal projects. It manages the working areas that we call Wilayah Kerja Panas Bumi, where companies are licensed to explore and drill. It coordinates the power purchase framework with PLN, which is our state-owned electrical company, and that right there is going to be the buyer for almost all the electricity for these projects that they produce. And lately, its biggest job has been cutting red tape. In 2025, the Minister of Energy publicly committed to slashing geothermal permit processing time from around 18 months down to 5 days. That's a massive shift. Permitting delays have been one of the main reasons projects stall for years before a single well gets drilled. Alongside that, the government has also committed to building tens of thousands of kilometers of new transmission lines because a geothermal plant sitting on a remote volcano is only useful if that power actually can be produced and can reach a city. Here's why investors are paying attention. At an energy gathering in September 2025 called IIGCE, companies and financiers signed agreements covering 265 megawatts of new capacity, and that was backed by roughly a $1.5 billion in investment. The World Bank has also set up a credit facility worth around $650 million specifically to help de-risk the early, expensive stage of geothermal exploration. Separately, the Asian Development Bank has also been funding individual geothermal expansion projects directly, and that's with loans running from tens of millions up to a few hundred millions a piece for each specific plant. Indonesia currently ranks second in the world for installed geothermal capacity behind the United States, but holds the largest estimated geothermal resources on the planet. Officials have actually talked about openly wanting to turn that resource lead into number one production spot too. Given the size of the resource, that's not an unreasonable ambition. It's generally one of the more credible growth stories in Southeast Asian energy right now. So let's speak about the challenge. It's worth being honest about why progress has been slower than the plan suggests. And it's also worth being precise about whose problem that actually is. Geothermal exploration is expensive and risky in a way that's different from solar and wind. Before you know it, if a site actually works, you have to drill. That exploration phase alone can cost anywhere from $30 to $50 million per site. And if the resource underground turns out to be weaker than expected, that money is simply gone. There's no way to recover it. Development costs in Indonesia also run higher than the global average, partly because of logistics, terrain, and financing cost. And the tariff structure, meaning what PLN actually pays for the geothermal power, has also been a persistent sticking point. The industry has been pushing for years for a tariff scheme that makes these projects more bankable. None of that sits inside EBTKE's control. EBTKE doesn't set what PLN pays for the power. It doesn't decide how global capital allocates risk money. Its job is policy, permitting, and the technical oversight, and on that front, it's actually the part of the system that's moved fastest lately. The slower moving pieces sit with other institutions and with the underlying economics of drilling a hole in the ground and hoping it pays off. Add it up, and one of Indonesia's own senior legislators put a number on it late last year. Something like $19 billion a year is needed to keep the renewable transition on track, which works out to roughly $190 billion over a decade. Regulatory reform helps, but permits alone don't drill wells and they don't write checks. That's the financing and marketing design problem as much as a regulatory one. So where does that leave EBTKE? Geothermal is just one thread of what the directorate handles, but it is a useful one because it shows that pattern clearly. Indonesia has the resource. It increasingly has the political will and simplified permitting process. What the country still needs in a geothermal and across a lot of the rest of the EBTKE's portfolio is the financing architecture, and the tariff economics to match that ambition. That's not really a knock on EBTKE. It's a reminder that the energy transition gets decided by more institutions than just one writing the regulations. Whether that gap closes will say a lot about how fast Indonesia's broader energy transition actually moves this decade, not just on paper, but underground, one well at a time, and increasingly on rooftops and in biofuel blends too. If you work in this space and you're watching it from the outside, it's worth keeping an eye on how EBTKE and the institutions around it handle the next stretch. The regulations are catching up. The real test is whether the capital follows. A quick note before I go. Everything I share in this series comes from publicly available Indonesian government regulations. I'm not giving any legal advice. This is not tax advice, nor this is investment advice. This is just to show you how the system works and explained very clearly. If you found this useful, please do me a favor and hit the like button, and do please subscribe and watch my channel for future informative videos about Indonesia, the energy sector, and infrastructure. Thank you for watching.